The church bell had already rung twice when the silence broke. Sunlight spilled through tall, dusty windows, warming the wooden benches and the faces of people who had gathered from miles around. White flowers lined the aisle, and the air smelled of pine, old wood, and promises that felt heavy. Just as the preacher lifted his hand to speak the final words, a voice rose from the back of the church, low, steady, and certain. He spoke her name. No, not loudly, not in anger, but with a truth that cut through every breath in the room. In that single moment, the wedding stopped, and nothing in this small American town would ever be the same. Before we go any further, if you love deep emotions, untold history, and timeless romance, this Western love story will stay with you. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and walk with us into a tale where love, fate, and courage collide under a wide Western sky. This story begins long before the church, filled with whispers and judgment. Begins on open land, where the wind moved freely and the earth remembered every footstep. The land belonged to many before fences were built, before towns had names carved into wooden signs. It remembered the Apache riders who once crossed it with honor, silence, and pride. Among them was a man known for his stillness. His name carried weight, spoken softly by those who respected him and feared him in equal measure. He was called Tahoma, a name that meant thunder held back. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, the world listened. Far from his world, in a town shaped by rules and expectations, lived a woman named Elowan Grace. Her name was spoken often, usually followed by praise for her beauty or sympathy for her situation. Elowan was known for her calm smile and kind eyes, but few knew the storms she kept hidden inside. She had grown up learning how to be polite, how to lower her voice, how to accept what life handed her without complaint. In this town, a woman's future was decided early, and Elowan's path had been drawn for her long before she understood what choice truly meant. The wedding was not born of love. It was born of agreement, of land deals, of respectability. The man waiting at the altar wore a fine suit and a confident smile. His name was Callahan Reed, a powerful name in the region, tied to cattle, money, and influence. To the town, this marriage made sense. Callahan offered security, status, and protection. What more could a woman want, they asked. They did not ask Elowan. Elowan stood at the front of the church in a white dress that felt heavier than armor. Each step she had taken down the aisle felt like walking deeper into a life that was not her own. Her hands trembled as she held her bouquet, and her heart beat so loudly she feared others could hear it. She told herself this was right, that this was how things were done. Yet somewhere deep inside, a memory stirred, one she had tried to bury. It was the memory of a river at dusk, years earlier, when her world had briefly touched another. She had been lost then, her horse spooked, her fear real. That was the day she first saw Tahoma. He had appeared without sound, like the land itself had risen to protect her. He did not ask questions. He did not judge. He simply helped, his presence calm, his eyes steady. In that moment, Elowan had felt something she had never known before. Safety without control. Strength without force. Their meetings after that were rare and quiet. Stolen moments under open skies, shared silences, and conversations carried by looks more than words. Never promised her a future, and Elowan never asked. Yet something grew between them, something honest and dangerous in a world that would never allow it. When pressure from her family grew stronger, when her engagement to Callahan was announced, Elowan believed she had no choice but to let that part of her life fade like a dream at sunrise. Tahoma felt the loss like a wound he did not show. Among his people, silence was not weakness, it was strength. He watched from afar as the town prepared for celebration, as Elowan's name was spoken alongside another man's. He told himself to let go, to return fully to his world. But love does not always listen to reason, and destiny does not always ask permission. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies and restless wind. The town buzzed with excitement, unaware of the tension riding just beyond its borders. Tahoma stood at the edge of the land, his horse beneath him, his thoughts steady but heavy. He carried no weapon, only a truth he could no longer keep silent. He knew what walking into that church would mean. Judgment. Danger. Perhaps worse. Yet he also knew what staying away would cost him forever. Inside the church, as the preacher prepared to bind two lives together, Elowan felt a sudden chill, as if the air itself had shifted. Her breath caught, her heart pounding in warning. Then it happened. The voice. Her name spoken the way only one man ever had. Every head turned, every whisper died. Time seemed to pause between one heartbeat and the next. Tahoma stood tall at the back of the church, his presence commanding without effort. He did not raise his voice again. He did not need to. Truth was already there, hanging heavy in the air. Iloan turned slowly, her eyes meeting his, and in that instant the world she had been taught to accept cracked wide open. No one moved, no one spoke. The preacher's hand lowered. Callahan's smile faded. The town held its breath, caught between fear, tradition, and something older than both. Iloan felt tears burn her eyes, not of shame, but of recognition. A choice stood before her now, real and terrifying. And so the wedding stood frozen, caught between what was expected and what was true. Love, long silenced, had finally found its voice. What Iloan would do next, and what price Tahoma would pay for speaking her name, remained unanswered as the bell outside began to ring again. Not for celebration, but for a turning point that would change every life it touched. The bell's echo faded, but the silence it left behind pressed harder on every chest inside the church. Iloan's fingers tightened around the bouquet, the stems biting into her palm. She did not turn fully at first. She was afraid that if she did, everything she had tried to bury would rise all at once. The town had always watched her closely, measuring her steps, her smiles, her obedience. Now those same eyes were fixed on her back, waiting to see if she would move, waiting to see if she would break. Tahoma remained where he stood, near the heavy wooden doors. Dust clung to his boots, proof of a long ride. His dark hair was tied back neatly, his posture calm but unyielding. He had crossed land that once belonged to his people, past fences and warning signs, all to stand in this place that had never welcomed him. He did not look at anyone else. His eyes stayed on Iloan, steady as stone. Carrying questions, he did not speak. Callahan Reed was the first to react. His jaw tightened, and a low murmur ran through the men seated near him. Callahan was used to control. He owned cattle, land, and loyalty bought with coin or fear. The presence of an Apache in his wedding was more than an insult. It was a challenge. He stepped forward slightly, his polished shoes scraping against the floor, but he stopped himself. Pride told him to act. Caution told him to wait. The preacher cleared his throat, his voice unsteady as he tried to regain order. This was not part of the ceremony he had memorized. He glanced at Iloan, then at Callahan, then finally at Tahoma, as if hoping one of them would explain the moment for him. None did. Outside, the wind pushed against the church walls, carrying with it the distant sound of horses and the endless breath of the plains. Iloan finally turned. When her eyes met Tahoma's, time seemed to stretch thin. Memories rushed back, not as images, but as feelings. The cool water of the river against her skin. The quiet strength in his hands as he helped her down from her horse. The way he had listened without interrupting, as if her words mattered more than the world around them. She felt the weight of her white dress, the weight of expectation, and wondered how she had ever believed this life would fit her. The town had its own memory of Tahoma, though it was shaped by rumor and fear. Stories passed in hushed voices about Apache warriors, about stolen land and broken treaties. Few spoke of the truth, of men forced into silence, of cultures pushed to the edge and told to disappear. Tahoma carried all of that history in his name, even if he never spoke it aloud. His presence in the church was not just personal. It was a reminder of something the town preferred to forget. Years earlier, when Iloan was still a girl, her father had struck a deal with Callahan's family. Land would change hands. Debts would be eased. Iloan's future would be secured. Love was never mentioned, because love was not considered necessary. When her parents passed, the agreement remained, sealed by expectation and pressure. Callahan stepped easily into the role prepared for him, confident and certain, while Iloan learned to quiet her doubts. Tahoma's path had been very different. He had grown up learning to read the land, to understand silence, to carry pain without letting it harden him. He had seen his people pushed aside, their voices ignored. He learned early that speaking too loudly could cost everything. That was why his decision to speak Eloan's name in the church mattered more than anyone there could fully understand. It was not rebellion for the sake of pride. It was a breaking of a vow he had made to himself to stay unseen. As whispers spread through the church, Eloan felt torn between two worlds. One promised safety and approval but asked her to surrender herself. The other offered uncertainty, judgment, and danger, yet felt honest in a way nothing else ever had. She wondered how many choices in her life had truly been hers. She wondered what kind of woman she would become if she stayed silent again. Callahan finally spoke, his voice controlled but sharp. He addressed the preacher first, demanding order, demanding respect. Then his eyes flicked to Tahoma, filled with something colder than anger. He did not use Tahoma's name. He did not need to. Power, in Callahan's world, came from denying others their identity. Tahoma did not respond. He did not step forward or retreat. His silence was not weakness. It was restraint. Those who knew him understood that when he chose to speak, it would not be to argue. It would be to state a truth that could not be taken back. Eloan sensed this and felt her breath catch. Part of her feared what he might say next. Another part feared what would happen if he said nothing at all. Outside the church, the town gathered, drawn by rumor and instinct. Faces pressed close to windows. Murmurs filled the street. This was no longer just a wedding interruption. It was a moment that threatened the fragile order of the town. Old tensions, buried under years of forced politeness, stirred again. The land itself seemed to listen. Eloan's thoughts drifted to the channel that had first given her courage. Stories whispered like this one, tales of forbidden love and hard choices shared through the Western love stories she once listened to late at night. Those stories had taught her that love was not always gentle, and courage often came at a cost. She had never imagined she would become part of such a story herself. The preacher waited, sweat forming on his brow. Callahan's hand clenched at his side. Tahoma stood still, a quiet storm held in place by will alone. Eloan stood between them, her heart pounding, her future uncertain. Every second stretched the tension tighter, like a rope pulled too far. No vows were spoken. No decision was made, yet something had already changed. The wedding, once a symbol of certainty, had become a question with no easy answer. And as the wind outside grew stronger, carrying dust and memory across the plains, it was clear that whatever came next would test every promise, every fear, and every truth they had tried to keep hidden. The silence finally broke, not with words, but with movement. The bench creaked as someone shifted their weight. A child coughed and was quickly hushed. These small sounds felt loud, almost disrespectful, against the heavy pause holding the church together. Eloan could feel the eyes on her from every direction, each one asking a different question. Was she afraid? Was she grateful? Was she about to ruin everything they believed in? Tahoma took one slow step forward. It was not a threat, but it was enough to make several men near the aisle stiffen. They were used to reading signs of danger, and they felt it now, not in Tahoma's posture, but in the meaning of his presence. He had crossed an invisible line that had been guarded for generations. The town had rules, and he was standing in the space where rules were enforced. Callahan lifted his chin, his voice smooth but edged with warning. He spoke about respect, about tradition, about order. His words were chosen carefully, meant to remind everyone who held power in this place. To him, this interruption was not about love or truth, it was about control slipping, even for a moment. It was something he could not allow. Eloan listened, but his words felt distant, like a speech heard through water. Her focus stayed on Tahoma. She noticed the small scar near his jaw, a mark she had once traced with her fingers while the sun dipped low. She wondered if he remembered that moment as clearly as she did. She wondered what courage had cost him to come here today. In the back rows, a woman named Prudence Holloway pressed her lips together. She had lived long enough to see what happened when people challenged the town's unspoken laws. Prudence had once loved a man she was told to forget. She had obeyed. Now, she carried regret like a quiet ache. Watching Eloan, she felt something stir that she had not allowed herself to feel in years, hope mixed with fear. Outside, Callahan's brother Rourke Reed stood with crossed arms, scanning the gathering crowd. He was a man shaped by loyalty to blood above all else. To him, Tahoma's presence was an insult that demanded an answer. He had already sent a boy running to gather more men just in case. Trouble, once invited, had a way of growing teeth. Tahoma's thoughts drifted briefly to his own people, to the elders who had taught him patience, to the young ones who watched him closely, learning how to survive in a world that did not want them seen. If he failed here, it would not only be his burden to carry. That knowledge weighed heavy, but it did not bend him. Some moments were larger than fear. Ilouan felt her breath steady as something inside her settled. She realized that no matter what she chose, there would be loss. Silence had already cost her years of her life. Speaking might cost her safety, her place in the town, perhaps more. The choice was not simple, but it was finally hers. That realization alone felt like a kind of freedom. The preacher attempted again to speak, suggesting they step outside, suggesting this could be handled privately. Callahan nodded slightly, eager to move the moment away from witnesses. Tahoma did not move. He understood the danger of closed doors, of conversations hidden from light. Ilouan understood too. She shook her head just once, a small motion that went unnoticed by most, but not by Tahoma. The town's history pressed close in that space. Stories of broken promises, of treaties signed and ignored, of lives reshaped by force. This wedding, meant to symbolize unity and order, had instead exposed fractures that ran deep beneath polished manners. The Western love story unfolding here was not one of simple romance. It was tied to land, identity, and the right to choose one's own path. Callahan's gaze hardened as he noticed Ilouan's attention drifting away from him. He had never doubted her obedience before. That doubt now burned. He wondered how long this connection between them had existed. What else he did not know. Possession, once questioned, often turned dangerous. A murmur rose as someone recognized Tahoma by name. The sound traveled like fire through dry grass. Names had power. They carried stories, and stories could not be controlled once released. Ilouan felt a strange sense of relief hearing his name spoken aloud, no longer hidden in memory alone. From the doorway, Tahoma finally spoke again, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the church. He did not accuse, he did not plead. He spoke of truth, of promises made without witnesses, of a bond formed not through contracts, but through choice. His words were simple, but each one landed with weight. He spoke as a man who had nothing left to hide. Ilouan felt tears gather, not from weakness, but from the strain of holding herself together for so long. She did not answer him yet. She could not. The moment demanded more than impulse. It demanded courage she was still gathering. Outside, clouds moved across the sun, casting shadows through the windows. The light shifted, changing the mood of the room. What had felt like certainty now felt fragile. People shifted uncomfortably, unsure whose side to take, unsure if sides even mattered anymore. Rourke Reed stepped closer to the doors, his presence a reminder that this conflict extended beyond words. Prudence Holloway clasped her hands tighter, silently urging Ilouan not to repeat her own mistakes. The preacher wiped his brow, knowing his role had slipped beyond his control. Tahoma met Ilouan's eyes one more time. In them was patience, respect, and a willingness to accept whatever choice she made, even if it broke him. That, more than anything, unsettled her. She had never been offered freedom without demand before. The bell outside began to sway again in the rising wind, its sound uneven now, uncertain. The wedding remained unfinished. The future stood open and dangerous. And as the town held its breath, caught between old rules and a truth that refused to stay buried, the tension thickened, promising that whatever came next would leave no one untouched. The wind pushed harder against the church now, rattling the windows as if the land itself wanted to be heard. Inside, the air felt tight, charged with something no one could name. Ilouan's heartbeat echoed in her ears, steady but loud, each beat reminding her that this moment could not be undone. She stood between two futures, both watching her closely, both waiting for her to choose which truth she would live with. Callahan shifted again, this time unable to hide his impatience. He took another step forward, his voice rising just enough to command attention. He spoke of honor, of promises made to families long gone, of the stability he offered. His words were polished, practiced, the kind of speech that had always worked before. But now they landed differently. The room had changed, and so had Ilouan. Tahoma listened without interruption. His face remained calm, but inside him, memories stirred. He remembered his mother teaching him that strength was not proven by force, but by restraint. He remembered elders warning him that love could be both a gift and a burden. Standing here in a place that was never meant to welcome him, he felt both truths pressing against his chest. In the pews, opinions began to divide. Some townsfolk clung to what they knew, fearful of change and the trouble it often brought. Others, quietly and cautiously, began to question the rules they had followed without thought for so long. Prudence Holloway watched Aloan closely, her heart aching with recognition. She saw the same fear she once carried, and the same chance she had let slip away. Outside, more men gathered, drawn by the tension spilling out of the church doors. Rourke Reed spoke in low tones to those who stood beside him, his eyes sharp, his posture guarded. He believed firmly in protecting his family's name. To him, this moment was a spark that needed to be stamped out before it became a fire. Aloan finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. She did not accuse. She did not explain everything. She spoke of feeling unseen, of living a life shaped by decisions made without her voice. The room leaned in, hanging on her words. Even Callahan seemed caught off guard, as if hearing her for the first time rather than the version he had assumed she was. Her gaze shifted to Tahoma, and for a brief moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. She spoke of kindness found in unexpected places, of silence that felt safer than promises spoken loudly. She did not say his name, but everyone knew who she meant. The honesty in her voice made the tension thicken rather than ease. The preacher lowered his book slowly. He realized that this ceremony had become something else entirely. It was no longer about binding two people together. It was about truth stepping into the light, whether the town was ready for it or not. Tahoma felt a stirring among the people behind him. Some watched with suspicion, others with curiosity. He understood that his presence forced them to confront stories they had been told all their lives. This Western love story was unfolding not just between two hearts, but between a town and its past. Callahan's control began to slip. His voice sharpened, his words losing their polish. He questioned Tahoma's intentions, his right to be there, his right to speak. Each accusation revealed more about Callahan's fear than about Tahoma himself. Aloan heard it clearly now. This was not love speaking, it was possession. The wind outside died down suddenly, leaving an eerie calm. Sunlight broke through the clouds again, spilling into the church and illuminating the dust in the air. The change felt symbolic, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Tahoma stepped forward once more, stopping a respectful distance away. He spoke of choice, of respect, of love that does not demand ownership. His voice remained steady, but the emotion beneath it was undeniable. He made it clear that he had not come to take Aloan away, only to stand for her right to choose freely. That declaration shifted something deep within the room. Aloan felt tears slide down her cheeks, unashamed. She realized that no matter how this ended, she would never again be the woman who stood silently at the altar. Courage had found her, not as a sudden burst, but as a steady flame she could finally trust. Rourke Reed moved closer to the doors, sensing the moment slipping beyond his control. Prudence Holloway rose slightly from her seat, as if ready to speak, then stopped, knowing this was Aloan's moment alone. The town seemed divided down the middle, held together only by the weight of what was unfolding. Memories flooded Aloan's mind. Long rides under open skies, quiet laughter shared without witnesses. The feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. She also remembered fear, the risk, the knowledge that choosing love might mean losing everything she had ever known. Callahan's eyes burned with a mix of anger and disbelief. He had never imagined standing on this side of rejection. Took a breath, steadying himself, and tried one last time to assert his claim, reminding Aloan of what she would lose if she walked away. Status, protection, acceptance. The words hung in the air, heavy and tempting in their certainty. Aloan closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of that offer. Then she opened them again, stronger than before. She looked not just at Callahan or Tahoma, but at the entire town. Her voice carried now, steady and firm, as she spoke of a life lived honestly. Even if it was harder, even if it meant facing judgment. A murmur swept through the church, louder than before. Some faces softened, others hardened. Change had arrived whether they wanted it or not. Tahoma felt pride rise quietly within him, mixed with fear for what might come next. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Love rarely was, especially when it crossed boundaries drawn by history and fear. But he also knew that whatever happened, Eloan was no longer alone in her truth. The bell outside began to ring again, this time uneven, pulled by the shifting wind. Its sound echoed through the town, calling attention to a moment that would be remembered long after the day ended. The wedding remained unfinished. The future remained uncertain. As Eloan took a slow step forward, her choice still unspoken, but close. Every breath in the room seemed to pause with her. The story stood at its edge, ready to tip toward a new beginning. While the heart of the town waited to see whether love would finally be allowed to win, Eloan's step forward felt small. But the sound of her shoe against the wooden floor echoed like a final answer. The room stayed silent as she lifted her chin and spoke, her voice clear and steady now. She thanked Callahan for what he had offered, for the life that looked safe on paper and proper in the eyes of the town. Then, she said, gently but firmly, that safety without truth was not a life she could continue to live. Her words did not carry anger. They carried relief. Callahan stared at her, stunned. For a moment it seemed he might argue again, might reach for the authority he had always relied on. But something in Eloan's expression stopped him. This was not a woman asking permission. This was a woman reclaiming herself. His shoulders fell slightly and the fight drained from his eyes. Pride still burned there, but it was mixed with understanding he had never allowed himself before. Without another word, he stepped back, giving her space at last. A breath moved through the church like a wave. Some sighed in shock, others in quiet approval. Prudence Holloway felt tears slip down her face, unashamed. She had waited a lifetime to see a woman choose differently, and the sight healed something old inside her. Tahoma did not move at first. He watched Eloan carefully, making sure her choice was fully her own. When she turned toward him and met his eyes, there was no doubt left. He stepped forward, slow and respectful, stopping beside her rather than in front of her. He did not claim her. He stood with her. The preacher closed his book softly. He looked at the two of them, then at the gathered crowd. In a voice quieter than before, he said that no vow spoken without truth could ever be sacred. No one argued. The wedding, once meant to bind to lives by obligation, had transformed into a moment of honesty no one would forget. They walked out of the church together, not hand in hand yet, but side by side. Sunlight greeted them, warm and honest. The town stood watching, some curious, some wary, some quietly hopeful. Eloan did not lower her eyes. She met their gazes calmly, no longer afraid of their judgment. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with talk. Some stories grew exaggerated, others softened with time. But the truth remained. A woman had chosen her own path, and an Apache man had been seen not as a shadow or a rumor, but as a person of integrity and courage. That alone shifted something lasting. Callahan left town for a time, seeking distance and clarity. When he returned, he carried himself differently. He focused on his land, on rebuilding respect rather than control. Though the wound to his pride remained, it no longer ruled him. In time, he would understand that love demanded more than ownership. Prudence Holloway visited Eloan one afternoon, bringing bread and a quiet smile. She thanked her for the courage she had shown, for proving that it was never too late to listen to one's heart. Eloan held her hand, knowing that her choice had given others permission to reflect on their own lives. Tahoma and Eloan took their time. They walked the land, talked beneath open skies, and allowed trust to grow without fear pressing against it. Their love was not loud. It was steady, built on respect and understanding. The challenges did not vanish, but they faced them together, honest and united. Some evenings, Alawan would listen to stories shared on the Western Love Story channel, smiling at how closely life had mirrored art. She understood now why such stories mattered. They reminded people that love, when chosen freely, could heal old wounds and open new paths. Seasons changed. The land softened under spring rains, then hardened under summer sun. Tahoma introduced Alawan to his people, not as something claimed, but as someone who had chosen to walk beside him. She was welcomed with caution at first, then warmth. In return, she shared her world honestly, without shame or denial. The town adjusted slowly. Children grew up hearing a different version of history, one that included courage, respect, and reconciliation. The church bell rang again many times, this time for celebrations built on truth rather than expectation. One evening, under a sky painted with fading light, Tahoma spoke of the future. He asked Alawan to walk that path with him, wherever it might lead. She answered without hesitation, her smile easy and sure. There was no grand ceremony that day, only a promise spoken freely, carried by the wind. Their story became one told quietly, passed from heart to heart rather than shouted. A reminder that love rooted in choice was stronger than fear, stronger than tradition, stronger than silence. And on that land where a wedding once stopped, a life truly began, guided by truth, courage, a love that had finally found its voice.